it is kind of insane because they clear you as a college undergraduate for top secret SC. Like it's the full clearance. So you were a full analyst. You're not. They don't hold back. So you go through the full polygraph, background investigation, psych exam, medical, all that stuff, interview process. And then they give you sit down and you have full access to everything. And I remember my first summer was 2006. And that summer there was a 34-day war between Israel and Hezbollah. I wrote a memo for the President's Daily Brief that summer as a 20-year-old. Which again is like probably inadvisable on the part of the U.S. national security community, but I did it. And I remember thinking, I actually really love this. And it is extremely satisfying, regardless of sort of how that thing gets used by the president. It's extremely satisfying to be involved in an endeavor that is aiming to sort of bring truth to someone who can make that decision.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this Mishcon Academy session. It is a series of podcasts, events, and meetings where we discuss some of the biggest issues faced by society. Yes, I was told explicitly to say that. My name is Emmerich Bernard-Jones. I'm the intelligence manager working with Mishcon, and I'm going to be your host today. And with that out of the way, I'm going to introduce my guest, David McCloskey. Hi.
Great to be here.
Oh, applause.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So for the benefit of everyone who haven't spent the last 3 weeks Googling you like I have, I'm going to do a quick career overview. You are a former CIA agent, an analyst, a national security advisor, McKinsey consultant, podcaster, and now a best-selling spy novelist. So I know it's hard to pick career highlights when your CV is that long. But why don't you give us a little sense of kind of how you got here?
Yeah, sure. And thanks again for having me. Great to be with you, Emmerich. So it was all a series of accidents. I think I could probably go back and like draw out some kind of wonderful portrait of how all of those different things that you mentioned I have done made some kind of sense. But at the time, it just sort of felt like stumbling forward into the next thing. So I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I went to a small school outside of Chicago. The CIA showed up and recruited on campus. And at the time, I basically had two things on my resume. I had been a cashier at the American burger chain Wendy's, and I had dug holes for a sprinkler system company.
Nice.
So those were my two jobs. So I thought, there's no way I'm getting into the CIA. Somehow I did. Worked on Syria as an undergraduate intern, which is actually bizarrely a real job that the CIA has. So my first day at the agency, I was 20 years old, and did that, worked on Syria, worked on the Middle East, and obviously worked on that country as it went from sort of, stable to knots, protests, civil war, eventually state failure. And the experience working on Syria at that time was probably the most sort of deeply affecting professional experience that I've ever had. It was so tragic and sad to work on that country at that time. And so when I left the CIA in 2014, I started to write about it. And there's a long and winding road to get to actually writing spy novels. But that process of kind of writing really came out of that experience working on Syria at the CIA. And I haven't looked back.
Nice. And so when you started writing, were you writing about your own experiences, or were you trying to always keep them in the kind of fictional realm so that you didn't get, sued or dragged off somewhere?
Right. Yeah, when I first started, there was a little bit that were kind of my stories or experiences, but I found in that kind of there was really this like 4-month period after I left the CIA where I was essentially going to a coffee shop like a homeless person and sitting there all day and just kind of writing, and people legitimately were like, what is this guy doing? Because I was just kind of staring at a computer screen all day. And for me, it felt like this opportunity to kind of just let the things that I wanted to write kind of come out of me. And I found that in that period where I was writing 8 to 10 hours a day, the things that gave me the most energy were not writing my own stories, but kind of I guess in some ways, writing stories of others who I had, gotten to know in Syria, coming up with characters, drawing out scenes that were sort of inspired by reality but not real. That stuff was more interesting to me, and allowed me, I think at the time, to kind of play around and explore the more human aspects of that conflict. Because when you're at the CIA and you're writing analysis, it's very dry.
Yeah.
Very dry. Maybe you might have experience writing some similar things here.
Yeah, also very
Mishkan,
dry.
Right? It's like, there was I think a hunger that I had to engage with the human level of that war, having seen it, having experienced it, having known so many people who had lived through it, but not really making that a focus of my professional, life at CIA. Writing allowed me to do that.
Sounds quite cathartic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And is your process for writing still the same today? Do you just go to a coffee shop and sit there for 8 hours, or is it different now?
More or less, yeah. I mean, so with the podcast now, it's a little bit like my days are a little bit chunkier, so I do have to do that, and I record that from a studio at home. But when I'm writing, that is very much, even though I have space at home to do that, and it's quite comfortable, like for some reason I really like to go to coffee shops to write. I find that just kind of the buzz around me is both sort of like white noise, and then also it actually weirdly helps me focus to have more stuff around. So I just put on big noise canceling headphones and sit there in the middle of a very busy coffee shop and write. And that's kind of my preferred way to get words on the page.
Okay. So going back to, I guess, your time at the CIA and your time in intelligence more generally, most of the people who work in the field, or at least the people who I speak to quite frequently, we all have like a spark, a thing that initially got us interested in wanting to work for it. We're quite a passionate bunch, I guess. You don't really find too many disinterested, analysts or political commentators, or maybe one or two, but they don't work here anymore. So what was that for you? What was your kind of, your inspiration moment?
Before I joined, or sort of
Like,
once I had joined?
What made you like think, oh, okay, I can really work in intelligence. This is like something that really interests me.
Yeah, I think that probably happened for me when it was a few months after I joined. Because I think the reason I did it, other than just sort of feeling like they had made some kind of massive mistake hiring me, given my background, and just feeling lucky to have gotten in, was that I was generally interested in the world. I had some sense of wanting to know how it works. I loved reading history and sort of about what was going on in the world. So, but again, I'm 19 years old, so there's just kind of this general feeling of I'm interested in this stuff. When I got in, it is kind of insane because they clear you as a college undergraduate for top secret SC, like it's the full clearance. So you were a full analyst. They don't hold back. So you go through the full polygraph, background investigation, psych exam, medical, all of that stuff, interview process. And then they give you sit down and you have full access to everything. And I remember my first summer was 2006. And that summer there was a 34-day war between Israel and Hezbollah. And Syria is obviously right next door and was indirectly involved. And I got to write, which again, it seems almost irresponsible. I wrote a memo for the President's Daily Brief that summer as a 20-year-old, which again is like probably inadvisable on the part of the U.S. national security community. But I did it, and I remember thinking, I actually really love this, and it is extremely satisfying, regardless of sort of how that thing gets used by the president. It's extremely satisfying to be involved in an endeavor that is aiming to sort of bring truth to someone who can make that decision.
Okay. And when you first got access to all of the information, did you look yourself up?
Did I look myself up? Surprisingly,
That's
the
a
Central
yes.
Intelligence Agency,
No.
The Central Intelligence Agency has not spied on Americans in America since the early 1970s. We did that a little bit back in the day.
Yeah.
But I did not have access to any databases that would have enabled me to conduct those searches. Yes, wink.
Got it. So moving swiftly on, let's talk about the reason that we're here today, The Persian, which is your fourth book. And I guess at its core, it's about a man who's going to extreme lengths to leave Sweden, of all places, and kind of go to live his American dream.
It's a very anti-Swedish novel.
Yeah,
at
very
its core.
anti-Swedish. What did the Swedish ever do to you? Set against a backdrop of Israeli intelligence and Iranian kind of state penetration, and it kind of comes at a time where the region is uncharacteristically volatile, I guess. So what made you want to write this now?
Yeah, it's a good question because I have, I think I've tallied it up now, throughout the writing process, I was sort of scooped by reality like 4 times. You know, there was missile and rocket volleys and drone volleys between Israel and Iran. Right after I started writing this, there was, of course, the pager attacks in Lebanon. There was the strike against Iran's nuclear program last summer, and then the 12-day war between Israel and Iran. So that all was happening as I was writing this novel, which was immensely frustrating from a plotting standpoint, but obviously created a lot of material for this book. And look, I started it because, you know, I had sort of watched the Israel-Iran shadow conflict at the CIA a little bit. I worked on Syria, so these weren't my main accounts, but Syria is involved in that, right? Mm-hmm. So I had kind of a half an eye on it. And it had always fascinated me because it is this really intense intelligence competition between the two that frequently is quite violent. Mm-hmm. And that to me felt like a setting for a spy novel where you have extremely high stakes and you have characters who are involved for all kinds of different reasons and who are putting a lot on the line to get things done. And so right there, you know, from a setting standpoint, there's a lot to work with. And the way I write is the characters come out of the setting and then the plot comes out of the characters. And so if you start with a great setting that is just charged, you're gonna have a lot to work with. And you know, it started, this one doesn't have any Americans in it, no CIA officers. Didn't start that way. It was kind of a CIA Mossad operation initially, and then, you know, they were to kind of target a group of Iranians, and over time the CIA fell out because it was just, storytelling was too clunky. And it became this kind of novel set amid the shadow war between the two nations.
Okay, and so whilst you were writing it, since all of this stuff was kind of going on at the same time, how much were you reacting to it versus trying to anticipate what was going to happen next?
Yeah, well, you can't anticipate it. I think the timeline, you know, you start writing a novel, it takes me somewhere between 12 and 15 months to write them. And then there's another year-ish of kind of getting it ready for publication, the editing, the marketing, the production, the distribution, all that. So you're talking about, like, when you start, you're sort of aiming at a target that's 2 years out. And you need the setting of the book, hopefully, to feel authentic to the readers, right, at that point. But as you're starting 2 years before that, you know, in today's geopolitical environment, it's really challenging to sort of hit that on the money, you know? So it's impossible to anticipate where things are going. I mean, side note, my 5th novel, the one I'm finishing now, I actually set amid the US-UK relationship because I thought it would be more placid, you know? And
are we at war with the US? What?
And that did, yeah. And then, you know, and now it's like I have to incorporate the possibility of armed conflict on Greenland into the novel. So you can't really beat or anticipate the headlines. I think what I have generally tried to do is make sure that I am not entirely dependent on a particular aspect of a geopolitical conflict, so that, you know, for example, my second novel, Moscow X, Putin's a character. And, you know, I woke up one morning when Yevgeny Prigozhin was marching on Moscow and found myself kind of secretly hoping that Vladimir Putin would survive, just purely from a standpoint of plot continuity, you know?
Yeah.
And so you kind of, you know, this novel, I mean, quite intentionally, doesn't have any very senior Israeli politicians in it. The supreme leader of Iran is not in this novel. And I kind of did that in part so that I wouldn't actually be scooped. And so this novel, you know, while it reflects a lot of the shadow war around it and the real headlines that we've all seen over the last couple of years, it's not ultimately dependent on them. And I think that I've really tried hard to make that so that it doesn't feel outdated by events when you pick it up.
Well, one of the things that you kind of mentioned is that there's a lack of, there's no CIA agents in the book, there's no American military agents in the book, but the idea of kind of America and what it means kind of permeates throughout what you've written. So obviously he's based in Sweden, but he's looking to move to America, and then in order to kind of fund that journey, gets involved in all of his escapades. And I just kind of think that it's interesting because a lot of the members of the like Iranian diaspora that I've met always have quite a close understanding or even interest in kind of American pop culture.
Yeah.
But with relations between Iran and America being so tense, do you think that that idea of the US as a kind of gold state, as a place to aspire to, still really exists?
Still exists. I mean, I'm sure it does to some degree. I think, you know, this is recency bias on my part. It certainly doesn't help when, you know, we say help is coming and it's not.
It's not.
Which is, you know, sort of yet another deeply tragic aspect of much of our policy in the Middle East, where we just get so out in front in what we say, and then we don't actually do the things that we say we're going to do. That doesn't help. And yet, I mean, there's an extremely vibrant, you know, Persian community in Los Angeles, for example, or in New York, and I think deep connections between those places and, you know, big cities in Iran that that exist irrespective of what the politics are. And so I think there probably is still a you know, sort of a strong desire, given particularly just how dire the situation is for so many in Iran, to get out and come to the States. But I think, you know, I mean, in setting anti-Swedish, you know, sort of tendencies aside, in setting this in Sweden, I mean, a lot of Iranians after the revolution, you know, went to Stockholm and set up there and have made tremendous lives for themselves outside of Iran in places like Sweden.
And so what is it you think that specifically makes the States the kind of golden ideal? Because there's, there were protests in Berlin the other day, and there were, you know, American flags saying that, you know, America is going to kind of help them and guide Iran out of whatever kind of state that it's in. But specifically for the main character, he has this like idealized view of what he expects his retirement is going to be like in the States. And after like maybe 20 years of sanctions and, I don't know, travel bans, et cetera, why did that kind of ring true for him?
Well, I think, you know, he is a bit of a fantasist. He admits this in the novel, and a lot of this book is written from, you know, from his first-person perspective as a confession to his Iranian captors. So he can imagine things in his own head and sort of hope that they're true without maybe them ever actually becoming true. So he's a bit of a fantasist. His name's Cam, also Cameron Esfahani. I think he has a sort of messed up and I think kind of disconnected family environment where he lives in Stockholm as well. And he wants to escape that. So in some ways, I think he has a very postcard version of the States and of Los Angeles that's pretty disconnected from any reality, but that for him represents just a desire, which I hope, you know, resonates with a lot of us, of just present circumstances may not be what we want them to be. And so the grass must be greener elsewhere, right? And that really motivates and drives him. And also, you know, a lot of this book is a story about somebody who, you know, he's an extremely, in particular at the beginning, I think, you know, interesting character in some respects, likable, but also quite narcissistic and quite self-interested. And this is right. Well, to some degree, yes. And you know, he wants money at the end of the day. Now, I will say to everybody, like, you know, sort of public service announcement, if you want to raise money, working for an intelligence service is probably not the best way to do it. Okay, so this is the opportunity that sort of lands in his dental chair in Sweden, because he's a dentist, and he jumps at it.
Right. And what was it? Okay, we've mentioned like 6 times now all of the kind of anti-Sweden rhetoric. Sweden is a perfectly pleasant place.
It's really not very anti-Swedish.
No, it's not. It's not. What was it? Why set it in Sweden?
Yeah. So there's a couple answers to that question. The first one is, I needed this character. This character had to be someone that the Mossad would recruit to work inside Iran. If he had been living in California, which I thought about, or in the States, he's not going to be, it's going to be much harder to imagine how he's sort of moving in and out of Iran and freely operating inside Iran. It's much easier to imagine that if he's coming from a place like Sweden, or a place, somewhere else outside the US where you have a Persian or Iranian diaspora. So that was kind of the Sweden thing. I also wanted him, especially as I kind of got going in the writing, I was really interested by the fact that he's got a bunch of different potential identities. So he's a Persian Jew, right? But he's Jewish, but he's not Israeli. He's Iranian, but he hasn't really grown up in Iran, even though he grew up in an Iranian family in Stockholm. He's Swedish. He has a Swedish passport, but as he will frequently say in the novel, it's like, well, is he really Swedish? Because a lot of Swedes don't think he is. So he's got all of these kind of potential identities that he can slip into, and frequently does at different points in the novel. And I think a lot of the stories that frankly interest me the most are ones where there could be a lot going on in a book, in a novel, but at the end of the day, it's a story about a person, and there is a central question of who is this person. And we as readers, there's the great scene in Lawrence of Arabia where this guy pulls up on a motorbike and looks at Lawrence. Lawrence looks at him for a while and he says, "Who are you?" And you can kind of see Lawrence's face moving in the change, and he's thinking about that question. I think that's kind of a central question in a lot of stories: is who is this person? And we're interested. We turn the page. We keep watching the movie because we want to figure out who they are. And I think in this novel, for me, as I was writing it, it was kind of this process of discovering who this guy is.
Interesting. Okay. And so how much of the research that you did for it was kind of based in what you've done before, and how much of it was you either going to Israel or going to Sweden and then kind of seeing what it's like? Because there's some excerpts and some parts in the book where you describe things like the traffic in Jerusalem, which is truly
Horrendous.
terrible.
Yeah.
It's awful. Yes. And the fact that they take out a lot of their rage about what's going on the roads, and that is pretty true.
Yeah.
How much of it was based here, and how much of it was kind of on the ground research?
Yeah. So I traveled extensively in Israel when I was at the CIA, but was not able to go back for this novel. But I have very visceral memories of the traffic and
the
driving
horns.
there, and the horns,
horns.
and also in Syria. I think my general model for driving in most of the Middle East is that you are responsible for the front part of your car. That is it. And there is an immense fatalism that comes. And even though I was not born and raised in the Middle East, getting behind the wheel in any of these countries, you feel it seep into your bones of like, if I die, I die. I will protect the front of my car, and everything else that happens will be, in the hands of God. So I had that experience from my time working there. I think, I will say that as we talk about the different layers to Cam's identity and the different places the story goes, I dug myself into a major hole because as you tick off the different aspects of Cam, just to take him, I am not Israeli. I am not Iranian. I've never lived in Stockholm. I'm not Jewish, right? I can travel to some of these places. I obviously can't travel to Tehran. So you have this question of like, well, how could I presume to write a character like that, or to write about places that I haven't been and maybe never will go? And I think the answer in fiction, or maybe the sort of dirty secret, is you don't need to have lived it yourself to write about it. You need friends who have, or contacts who have. And in this case, there'd be people who would get on the phone with me, and I would say, look, okay, I'm thinking about a character like this. what neighborhood in Iran would they, or in Tehran would they live in? And if you're talking to someone who lives in Tehran, they would say, well, it might be this place. And then you'd get on the phone or you'd find someone who lives in that place. And you would say, well, where do you go to get your bread, your cheese, your fruit? What is the traffic like? What does it smell like? What kinds of things do you wear when you're going to a dinner party? Like these questions that you really won't get the answers to if you are just reading a book about Iran's foreign policy or the history of Iran. Like you kind of need that stuff in the back of your head, particularly early in the writing process. But as you go, you realize you need a lot of very fine detail that you can only get from people who have lived those, lived through those experiences, lived in those places. And so my research process is just a tremendous amount of phone calls and Zooms and FaceTimes with people who will talk to me even just for 10 or 15 minutes about, the traffic in Tehran, which is another feature of this. Is just when you talk to actual humans who live in these places, a lot of it is the same stuff. It's like
everyone hates traffic.
Traffic, food, congestion, the fact that the Islamic Republic cannot collect sewage, or manage the water infrastructure or collect trash off the streets, things like that, that you just, if you're reading foreign policy stuff, you'll just never see.
I have all the same complaints of Brent Council. So that's great. Okay, so changing pace a little bit. I'm going to play a little game with you.
Okay.
So I'm going to play a game that I am going to call asking David very pointed questions for my own amusement. And basically, I'm just going to grill you about a couple of the things that you wrote in the book.
Okay.
Because we're in a law firm and that's what we have to do.
Yes.
So I'm going to have my very glamorous assistant pass me the board of doom. Thank you. Okay.
We have one of these at the CIA too.
The board of doom. Okay. So can you please tell me who this man is and why you hate him?
Okay. So is this video going to be distributed widely, or is this is Tim McGraw?
This is Tim McGraw.
So when I was writing The Persian, I needed, so as I said, the protagonist is in an Iranian prison for most of the story and is undergoing severe interrogation and torture at the hands of his captors. And one of the ways that you actually do this is by blaring for periods of time extremely horrendous music. And I wanted there to be a song that had been played constantly for Cam in the early days and throughout his sort of interrogation and his captivity that he has a visceral reaction to. And I remember, I don't exactly recall when this song came out, but I remember hearing a Tim McGraw song called Truck Yeah.
It's terrible.
That played on
terrible.
the radio incessantly when I was, I think, in high school. And I just really despised the song. And this is my prerogative as a writer of fiction, was that I could then just put that into the novel and make that an instrument of torture that the Iranians had used against Cam, because they had figured out at some point that he also despised the song, and so just played it on endless repeat. So there are scenes where he gets thrown back into his cell after he's interrogated and after he's writing, where he can hear Truck Yeah blaring, and those are some of his darkest moments in the novel, actually, are at the hands of Tim McGraw.
Yeah.
Yes.
So is Tim McGraw aware of this beef? Is he aware that you don't like Truck Yeah?
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, if he is, I have not yet heard from his lawyers.
Well, I think we can make it happen. Do you have any messages to deliver directly to the camera that we can send to Tim McGraw?
I don't get litigious, Tim. There's nothing here for you to come for.
Okay, well, thank you, Tim. Come to the Academy next time. So that was Exhibit A, and now we have Exhibit B.
Yes, okay.
Yes. So in chapter 2 of the book, there is an interrogation scene in which a man called Amir Ali is sentenced to 50 lashes administered in part by a woman wearing Valentino heels. And you specifically say...
That doesn't sell you on the novel. I don't know what will.
Well, yeah, it's great. But you specifically say that they are, quote, studded Valentino shoes. Now, as I'm sure that you're aware, the shoe in question is almost certainly the Valentino Garavani Rock Stud Pump. Now, this pump came out in 2010 and almost immediately was taken up by the glitterati. You know, you had some diplomats' wives wearing it, you had some minor royals, you had some well-dressed lawyers. But because it was so unique, it was really vulnerable to duplication. And
Yes.
so almost immediately filtered down, you know, through to department stores and kind of knockoff brands, where it eventually landed where now it's less of a status symbol and more of a sad gift that a husband would buy his third wife after he forgets their anniversary. So I wanted to ask you, when you placed
Yes.
the Valentino Garavani Rockstar pump into the world of the Persian,
Yes.
what did you intend it to say about the woman wearing them?
All of the things you just said.
So is she the 2010
Yeah,
diplomat, or is she the sad woman who got it bought for her by a man who doesn't understand footwear?
It's probably the latter.
Probably the
Given
latter.
the character in the novel.
Given the character.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what was it about this particular shoe that stuck out to you? Because you were, you know, writing and you decided to pen that little
Yes.
detail in. So clearly, it had an impact on you.
Yeah. It was more of a knuckle dragger response, which was that they were shiny.
They were shiny. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. You
Yes.
saw someone wearing them and you went, ooh, shoe.
Shiny.
Okay, shiny shoe.
The points in that scene, which I don't want to like belabor that scene because it is,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on.
I don't want to
there.
ruin it.
There's a lot going on there. Was contrast. Because the character who is wearing these horrendous shoes is pretending to be a member of the Islamic Republic's guidance patrol, so a version of its morality police. And that is the moment where you as the reader will realize that she is not actually that. And so it was a contrast between the sort of clothing of that uniform and this horrendous
lovely
fashion
shoe.
statement. That's right.
Well, at least now you know what not to get your wife for your next anniversary.
I'll add it to the list.
Add it to the list. Can I just thank you, glamorous assistant. Okay, so after the, did you enjoy the game?
I did actually immensely.
Good. It's a fun
Yes.
game. After this, you've got a live podcast recording for The Rest is Classified. Congrats on
Thank you.
selling out the show.
Thank you.
I look forward to being a guest. Tee-hee-hee. What's the most challenging part of kind of hosting a show that covers so many hot button topics and issues?
Well, I think, you know, the headline on the podcast is it's great fun. I mean, Gordon and I get along really well, and I have fun poking at his Britishness and his journalist tendencies because I'm just not those things. So we have a really good time with it. I think the way we do this podcast is it is a like conversation between Gordon and I. So it's not a show where we have a guest come on, we've got 10 questions we're going to ask, and we've done a little research, and we have an interesting conversation. It's Gordon and I go back and forth for 45 minutes to an hour about a real kind of meaty topic in the intelligence world. And that could be something from, you know, our first episodes, we're on Iran in 1953, the coup, the CIA MI6 coup against Mossad. We did 2 episodes on that. And then this past month, we've done 2 episodes on Venezuela and the raid on Maduro, 2 episodes on Jeffrey Epstein and whether he had connections to intelligence services, and like 2 episodes on Iran. So really current stuff. So everything in between. It's a lot of, we don't have research assistants. We do all of the digging, the research, the calls ourselves to build that content. So that's the hard part is, you know, if we're recording episodes, we've gone really deep together to research that topic. It's tremendous fun, but it's also, you know, we're putting in a lot of work because we want that, you know, I think we hope people come to the podcast for the banter and the fun conversation that Gordon and I have, but we also hope that people come because we provide value in giving you insights about what might actually be going on in the intelligence business, or sort of scraping beneath the surface of the headlines to describe what's actually going on. So we do a lot of work to make sure we deliver that.
And one of the people on the back of the book with other lovely quotes is Rory Stewart,
Yes.
who's in another one of the Rest Is kind of podcasts. So is there a The Rest Is collective like group chat? Is there like a WhatsApp group? Do you all chat with each other?
There are select kind of one-off. We don't have a full Rest Is chat.
Oh, wow.
but there is a lot of connection, obviously, between the shows. And we're all working with Goalhanger Productions on this, so there's connection through that as well. And I think, I'm not sure if it's been announced yet, but there will be like I think it's called the Rest Is Fest that is happening in September this year, where they will do a whole collab thing with the other shows, which will be
nice.
great fun. Yeah.
It's like a cinematic universe.
Yes, exactly. It's like the Marvel Cinematic Universe of sort of awkward podcasters. Yeah, that's right.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
Wow. And so what do you think has been your most, let's say, challenging discussion that you've had on the podcast to date? Or the thing that made you either, I don't know, the angriest or want to swing at someone?
The angriest. Well, we did 6 episodes on Edward Snowden last year, and I really don't like Edward Snowden at all. I think what he did is horrendous, and I don't like him personally. And I was hopeful that in the research on that, I might soften my opinion, but it only went the other direction as I got deeper in it. So that was kind of a bit of a hard conversation, also because I know a lot of people who were involved in sort of trying to plug some of the leaks around that fallout, and it was just really messy because I was still inside the agency at that time. So that was I think it ended up being a good series that we did, but it was a tough conversation. I think, honestly, the episodes we did recently on Iran, right? Coming off of working on the Persian and getting ready to launch it, and just seeing this sort of how immensely tragic the situation is there, and the massacres that the government has perpetrated on its own population. It's always hard to have a conversation that is happening at kind of the intellectual, analytical level when you know that there's a tremendous, just incredible amount of suffering that's happening on the ground. I mean, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have that analytical conversation, but it makes it, I think, more delicate, and you have to be careful. So those were hard episodes to record as well.
And what do you see kind of going forward? What's next for either, well, if you can cast a crystal ball, what's next for Iran, but also what's next for you?
Yeah. So in Iran, I mean, that's the sort of impossible question to answer. I think, we in those episodes we talk a lot about how difficult it is to predict what's going to happen next in these kind of situations, and kind of why. Because when you get down to a potential revolutionary situation and you're trying to predict what comes next, you're really getting into the sort of what's going on inside the minds of hundreds of thousands of people, be they protesters, oppositionists, or the people who in particular work inside the security services in that country. Is there a point where their sort of private views become the public views, and they see that cascade happening around everybody in the society? There's a reason why nobody saw, really, Iran 1979 coming. People didn't see the French Revolution coming. People didn't see the Russian Revolution coming. People didn't see 1989 coming, right? Across Central and Eastern Europe. These things are inherently unpredictable, and you really get to the limits of human cognition and prediction in trying to look into a crystal ball in these situations. So it's immensely challenging. The pillars that support the Islamic Republic are a lot weaker now than they were even a month ago. But the 2 most important ones, which is that loyalty and effectiveness of your security services and your military, and how the elites kind of cohere together, those 2 things have held so far for the most part. So we'll see. And in terms of what's next for me, I literally sent the draft of my 5th novel to my publishers when I landed at Heathrow on Saturday to get here. So that's done, hopefully.
Coffee shop Wi-Fi?
Yeah, coffee shop. Well, actually, I had not had good plane Wi-Fi, so when I landed, I literally got a personal hotspot going and fired it off.
Nice.
After staying up all night finishing it. It's a novel set in the U.S.-UK relationship of today, which again, as I was saying, I was like, oh, this will be, nothing will happen, right? Obviously, in the last year, that'll be quiet. Nope, wrong. And it's about whether I could find ways to really stress and rupture the CIA MI6 intelligence partnership and bring that to a point where both services are spying on each other again. And it turns out I was able to find a way to do it.
Good job.
Yeah, yeah. And initially when I started, I thought it'd be hard, and it was a lot easier than I had imagined, which gave me a lot of fodder for the novel and also made me deeply concerned about the future of the special relationship. But that is what's next, and it'll be out either later this year or a year from now here in the UK.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that's all the questions I have, but I think I've saved some time to open things up to the room and to any kind of questions that we may have online. So I guess I'll start with the room first. If we have any questions, comments, concerns, compliments. You.
Why did you name one of your lead characters Artemis Aphrodite?
So one of my characters, she's not in this novel. She's in the first three, and then she'll be back in the next one. Excuse me, is a CIA case officer named Artemis Aphrodite Proctor. And to be honest with you, this is why I think she's such a great character. I distinctly remember starting with the last name when I was writing my first novel, that she was the chief of station in Damascus, like Proctor. Okay, Proctor is the last name. Don't know where it came from to this day. And as I went, later on in the chapter, I realized I needed to come up with the first name, and Artemis kind of came out of the blue. And I didn't have a middle name for a little bit, but as I was thinking about who she is and how someone gets the name Artemis, no offense to any Artemises who might be in the house, I thought, well, maybe she's got a dad who just is fascinated with Greek mythology. And so then I thought of, Aphrodite, and I thought of Artemis Aphrodite Proctor. Like, that's a pretty good name for a fictional character. And it also gives you some of the contrast between those two Greek goddesses, which I really enjoyed. And so that's kind of where the name came from. And it just was one of those things instantly where you look at it and it's like, that's perfect.
Great. Any other questions? I like to point at people. You.
Hi, you've worked obviously for the CIA as well as you did lots of research for Mossad. Would you say there are any similarities or differences between the two?
So this novel was different from the others in that I had to find Mossad officers who would talk to me.
It's notoriously easy to do.
Yes, very easy. And they were slightly more reluctant to speak to me than my CIA counterparts, and much more circumspect when they did. But I did find a few who would talk to me and who would kind of let me, say, hey, I want to write a scene that looks like this, and how would you be thinking about this situation, or what would this, is your tradecraft in this piece the same as ours? And I could kind of compare and contrast, which was really helpful. And the thing I discovered was that the two services are immensely different. There are some similarities. A lot of the tradecraft is just the tradecraft of, sort of how do you detect surveillance and things like that. But the services themselves are just very different. One way that they're different is that Mossad, as I was reminded over and over again, by Mossad officers, but also just by the things that happen as I'm writing the novel, the risk aversion is pretty low, right? They are willing to do things that put their officers and their assets in extreme danger. And they do that when they feel, particularly if you're talking about Iran, like this is an existential problem for the Israeli state and for Mossad. And so they're willing to do things that the CIA would just never do. And so that makes obviously compelling fodder for a spy novel, but it's a reality of the way Mossad works. The other way they're different, kind of bureaucratically, is Mossad, like at the CIA, we call it global coverage. So if the president has a question about the, sort of economy of Argentina, we have an Argentine economic analyst who will write something. Mossad doesn't have Argentine economic analysts. Like, they are very focused on a set of threats and states in the Middle East that matter deeply to Israeli security. So they have a much more narrow focus. The other way they're different is the CIA is a really big bureaucracy in some respects. And so when we're putting a team together or an operation is coming together, it is bureaucratic feeling, right? Mossad is much more nimble, they're smaller, and the way they put teams together is really kind of ad hoc. So an idea might pop up, we're gonna do this thing. You saw this with the pager attacks, actually. If you go in and look at the Reuters reporting on this and some of the New York Times reports on how that thing came together, it was an idea that a pretty low-level Mossad officer had that was just a good idea. And so it starts to gain traction in the system. People from, operations, tech, analysis get added to it over time, and it kind of snowballs from there. So the bureaucracy sort of moves more nimbly based on need in a way that the CIA kind of doesn't. So a lot of differences between the two services, for sure.
Any more? Any online? No? Okay, well then I'll ask another one.
Yeah.
Which one do you think is more effective then? We've got to pick. We've got a little mission going on. Who are you going to bet on?
I think it depends on where it is.
Lebanon.
Oh, Mossad.
Okay. Turkey.
Mossad.
Egypt.
Mossad.
Well, I think we got our answer there.
Argentina, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. I mean, all kidding aside, like the way the partnership works between, the US and Israel on intel is like, we have a massive, and it's not totally dissimilar between the US and the UK, where we have a massive amount of technological resources and reach that we essentially use as leverage and barter with smaller services who might have really deep regional kind of connections, human capabilities, but in a tighter geographic pocket. And so a lot of the kind of trade is we will give you access to sort of essentially capital, intel capital, and you give us access to stuff that you've collected, on the ground, be it in Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, wherever. So that trade back and forth is kind of the way that commerce functions. And it works for the CIA because we don't need, the Israelis don't share everything with us. You guys don't share everything with us. You share more than the Israelis do. But we actually don't have to collect some of this stuff. And we don't need, the US doesn't really need the same covert action capability in Lebanon or in Syria or in Iran that the Israelis do, because we're a long ways away.
And so what made you switch to looking at the UK-US relation from everything else?
I was fascinated by how it worked. I also thought that given, I'd done a lot of analytic exchanges with UK services, with the JIC, with MI6 or SIS. But I didn't really understand how the organization works. I'd met people, but there's a kind of limited understanding of, well, how do you conduct operations? How does this sort of kind of commerce with the Americans work? So I was fascinated by that. And I also thought, given that so many of your former officers, well, everybody has to sign the Official Secrets Act, that I might actually have a way to write something about your service, because I didn't sign that, right? I might have a way to write about your service. And obviously I'm not going to be irresponsible, but to kind of shed a bit more light on it than even a lot of the formers coming out of SIS are able to do. So it felt like an opportunity to kind of indulge my own research instincts on a topic that I really am interested in, and to bring something new to the table.
Cool, amazing. Well, I think we all look forward to reading it. I think we've got some time to do book signings and anything further that people want. But David, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.